This meeting to order. This is our February 4th, 2025 Midvale City Council meeting. Thank you for those who are joining us here in person. We just had a robust workshop discussion on intergovernmental policy, so that was interesting. We are going to go ahead and start, as we always do, with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Oh, you're good.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Rory, will you call the roll?
Yes. Councilmember Glover.
Here.
Billings. Here. Miculash. Here. Brown.
Here.
And Robinson. Here.
Okay, and that is all of us. We're going to start with a proclamation. February, as we all know, is Black History Month. So, Midvale City proclamation proclaiming February as Black History Month. Whereas Gerald Ford officially recognized Black History Month in 1976, calling upon the public to seize the opportunity to honor the too often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every area of endeavor throughout our history, and whereas the United States designates the month of February as Black History Month, providing an opportunity for all citizens to reflect on and commemorate the rich heritage, achievements, and contributions of Black Americans to our nation. And whereas the theme for Black History Month 2025, African Americans and Labor, highlights the essential role Black Americans have played in shaping the nation's labor force, from agriculture and industrial work to leadership in labor movements, entrepreneurship, and professional excellence. And whereas throughout history, Black Americans have played pivotal roles in shaping the cultural, social, economic, and political fabric of the United States, contributing to the advancement of our society in a myriad of fields such as science, arts, music, literature, sports, and civil rights. And whereas this occasion provides an opportunity to reflect on the experiences, contributions, and resilience of the Black community, and whereas, as a community, we must continue to work collectively to eradicate discrimination and prejudice, striving for a future where every individual, regardless of race, enjoys equal opportunities, justice, and dignity. And whereas Midvale City recognizes February as a time to celebrate and honor the rich tapestry of Black history, while reaffirming our collective commitment to fostering a more just, inclusive, and equitable society. Now, therefore, let it be resolved that Mayor Dustin Gettle and the City Council of Midvale City do hereby proclaim February 1st through February 28th, 2025 as Black History Month in Midvale City, adopted this 4th day of February 2025. And this is signed by me, the mayor, and all members of the City Council. Okay, moving on to public comments. Any person wishing to comment on any item not otherwise scheduled for a public hearing on the agenda may address the City Council. At this point, by stepping forward, we will limit comments to 3 minutes. Are there any public comments? Okay, seeing none, we will move forward then to council reports. And first up, Councilmember Bonnie Billings.
Just really quick, I just want to remind everybody that right now Utah State is in their legislative session. So if there are any bills or issues that you are interested in, please go check out the state website and you can find a lot of things. There's about 500 bills so far, more than that. So that's all today.
Thank you. 500 bills, and some of them are good.
Some of them are good.
All right, next up we have Councilmember Paul Glover.
Thank you, Mayor. This week was a fun week for me. I happened to get, and I've passed these out to each of the council. I have 2 different classes in East Midvale Elementary, 3rd graders. They're learning about government, and their teachers are Lisa Perina and Kelowna Sturgis, and they asked me questions about the city and what we can do about different things. And the one teacher just summarized the whole class and then asked the question, and I wrote them back. And the other one, they sent me their actual pages of what they want. and they're really fun to read through. Basically, they really want a safe Midvale, okay? And they would like clean air, and they have the things that they think might help be able to do that, okay? Which was really, really fun. I would like to just read the back of one of these. This is on the first page of the ones that are handwritten, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but basically they want us to put cameras up, and then she said, I want a sign at the bottom that says, smile, you're on camera. So, but you can read through those. They're a lot of fun. Really good experience to be able to get those young people interested in government and what they could try to do. So lots of fun ideas in there, so you can read through them. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I did read some of those. They're pretty adorable, but they do have some very specific asks.
Oh, they do.
So,
And
nice
it was
to
a
see.
little hard writing some of the stuff back, what we should do, but I did it.
Very nice. Thank you for that. Next up, we have Council Member Heidi Robinson.
Thank you, Mayor. I actually just want to take this quick opportunity to again welcome Cactus and Tropical to Maine. If you haven't got out there to see the shop, I highly recommend it. And then you could even swing in next door to Bambino's and get some pizza. I really hope people are paying attention to what's happening on Maine. As we can see, there's finally some traction there. Things are happening, and we've got some beautiful lights going in. And I just really hope the community will get out and support what's happening there. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member, and Council Member Bryant Brown.
Yeah, thanks. I just mostly want to reiterate what Councilmember Robinson just said. I've gotten so many positive notes about just the northern half lighting and how different it was. I'm all in favor of making it light to begin with, but I didn't realize how much different it is, and it's phenomenal. I noticed the string lights more and more going up, and hopefully that's. Unfortunately, the south ends where Cactus and Tropicals and Bambinos are. So the sooner we can get those lights on, I think, the better. But it feels just so much more inviting and safe and clean. The fixtures were better than I thought. And one thing I kind of wanted to bring up to maybe a long-term plan is the company that put in a bid. The picture that they provided had like this iron sign that went over the street that said like "Welcome to," and it was some other city. And seeing those lights, I think we should look into putting in some money to do that. Like, "Welcome to Midvale, Maine," on both the north and south. Because now that I see it, it just seems like, oh, this is a whole area. I'm finally seeing what Nate sees, I think. So that's something I'd like to look into is that, and maybe not right away. But I'm sure Nate or someone could find that picture that I was talking about on the bid. Yeah, I think he knows what I'm talking about. Anyways, just my 2 cents on that and try to make it better, because I feel like it's like snowballing. Like every time we do something, it's just better and better. So those are my thoughts.
Quick follow-up to that, with the lighting in particular. Cactus and Tropicals is going to do an official grand opening next month, right? March. And we were trying to coordinate the official launching of those lights with that event, because there'll be more eyes upon the street on that day, rather than if we just did it randomly next workshop or something. So that is the plan, towards the end of March to do that.
Cool, thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Councilmember Denise Mikalash, welcome to your first official full council meeting.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So I've been playing catch up and meeting with all the senior leadership and the city and the council. And I just have to say, I was already excited to be here, but after talking to everyone and getting involved and hearing what's going on, it makes me even more excited to be here. So I'm looking forward to continue to support everything. I agree with all the other council members about how city Main Street is starting to just look amazing, and everyone's getting excited about it. So can't wait to spend time down there. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember. For my update real quick, I'll echo those comments as well. It's interesting now, in my role as mayor, being out and about in different community meetings, how many mayors and city council members from across the county are talking about what we're doing specifically on Main Street and how they can replicate that for some communities in their cities as well. So definitely has not gone unnoticed. I did want to mention tomorrow at Two Row Brewing, there is an event, Meet the Mayor, and also a night of bingo and games and prizes. They said that they had thousands of dollars of prizes, so please come on to that. That's tomorrow from 6:30 to 9. I am going to do my best to call bingo as well, so I'm working on some of my dad bingo jokes, so be there or B12. Thank you.
I got you.
Hey, we got it. Also, I wanted to give you a quick update on the UFA and their role in the Palisades, LA fires. So they did get back last week, was it? Was it last Thursday? So they are back. They spent about 2 weeks there. They deployed on the 9th of January. They got there on the 10th. Total from around Salt Lake County, there were 65 fire personnel. 8 of those were from UFA. So I was thinking we could have them, as many of those 8, come here. We'll do an official recognition, hopefully next council meeting, but getting the band back together is a little bit difficult, but not impossible. So either the next meeting in February or the first meeting in March, we're hoping to have them here and show our appreciation for what they did. So there were a couple of stragglers out there who asked, like, why is UFA helping with these California fires? Don't we have stuff for them to do here? And what I've learned in the preceding subsequent weeks is that it's only a matter of time before there's a wildfire in Utah. Unfortunately, that will be the case at some point. And having this experience through what was basically the worst wildfire in that region's history only gives us that much more experience for when that inevitable occurrence happens closer to home. And also the flip side of that is that those firefighters in California remember that, hey, I remember when all these Utah personnel came to California to help us, let's go help them. So it's a very easy explanation to those in the community if anyone reaches out and says, why are we helping people in California? The worst I heard was, why are we helping a bunch of rich people in California save their homes? I'm like, because they need help. And I think having those firefighters here just to show our appreciation, whether it's next meeting or the following, will be a good thing. And we'll do the picture up the stairwell because those pictures turned out pretty good the last meeting. So that's all I have for tonight. We'll move on to the city manager report. Matt Dahl.
Thank you. A few things. First, as long as I've been here, and probably well before that, Midvale City has sponsored a table at the Canyons Education Foundation Gala, which happens in the spring. We have, once again, sponsored a table, which provides us a table of 8. The gala this year is going to be on March 27th, and it'll be from 6 to 9. Earlier today, council members, you should have received an email from Caitlin seeing if anyone wants to sit at our table. And so just please, if you have any interest in that, please get back to Caitlin as soon as possible. They do like to make sure that all the seats are filled, and so if we still have seats, then we'll work on finding other people to participate on behalf of Midvale. It is cocktail and semi-formal attire, so I don't know if I have any cocktail clothes, but I definitely have semi-formal. Okay, so there's that. Next thing is just expanding on what Councilmember Billings had said earlier about the legislative session. I have been working, actually staff has been working very hard to try to get their hands around all of the bills that are impacting municipalities and which ones particularly affect Midvale. We've been working on the Spataphores to refine that list, and we've been working on specific bills. The mayor was up at the legislature last week, for the bill that's changing how ties are addressed when selecting new mayors and council members.
As much as we love the coin toss, that might be no more.
I believe what you were proposing wasn't it the 20-sided Dungeons and Dragons dice? Is that the...
Marathon Monopoly is my 3-hour minimum.
I also spoke last week regarding a bill that would have reduced or diluted the amount of funding that goes into the homeless shelter mitigation fund. And at least for that moment, that one was successful. Now there's only 3 or 4 other bills that are trying to do the same thing. But in any regard, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make the list so it's clear what are Midvale bills, what are significant impacting Midvale bills, and then bills of interest so that we can get that to you to look at. In the meantime, the Utah League of Cities and Towns, ulct.org, has a bill tracker on their website where they are tracking all of the bills that impact municipalities. It's way too much for us to do. I'm glad that they're doing it, but they will have some information there too that will kind of help you decide if that's something you want to look into a little bit more. If you do look at the bill tracker and there is something that you want to make sure is on our list, please let me know and we'll get that on there so that we can track it and make sure that we have our representation up there or staff members communicate on that issue. And then my last item is, admittedly, I did not actually invite Brian to come here today. This is Brian Buckout. You want to come up front? Brian is our emergency manager, emergency planner officially, from UFA. He is one in a series of exceptional people that we have had the opportunity to work with, where they are a member of UFA, and they work with us and other communities in order to do the planning, emergency planning for our community. Now, when I said I didn't invite him to come here, he just decided for the fun of it to be here this evening, and so I thought that would make it a perfect opportunity to invite him up here to meet with all of you. So I just thought he would give a quick introduction to who he is, maybe a little bit of what he does, and then if anyone has any questions, you can ask.
Thank you. There we go. Yes, so my name is Brian Buckout. I come to you with 6 years of emergency management background. I came from the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services under Response Division in Coastal Region, so that serves the Bay Area, Humboldt, Sonoma, Napa, places that burn a lot. So within that time, probably had about 6 federal declarations, so FedDecs as we call them, short, state of, and 12 state of emergencies. Earthquakes, floods, civil unrest, obviously COVID that we're all involved in. And then I did about 10 years of response background for Department of Health and Human Services on a disaster medical team as an EMT first responder and disaster logistics tech. So as Matt says, I've come here as a planner. My main job is to provide plans, guidance, prompts, training and exercise, but most importantly, the intent of that is to have Midvale City staff be able to make decisions in a time of crisis at the city level to support the incident. Obviously, we know the incidents are often run by our fire and law branch, but to support the incidents. And mainly for that is to recover and respond from a disaster. So mainly, in short, to take a hit. That's what I'm here for. How can I better make it where we make a more resilient Midvale, so in order we can take a hit? And how we do that is to every time we have a day where we have no disaster, we call those blue sky days, and we want to take advantage of those. So those are the days for us to get to work and to really work on our networking. One of the reasons why I'm here is because there might be a non-blue sky time in which I may have to present something. And so for knowing everybody and what they do and how this thing works, it helps us. So we don't want to be exchanging business cards in the middle of an incident. That's the main thing that I was taught back at Cal OES. So there'll be more plans to come. There'll be more presentations down the line. We are building things out at the county. And I'm willing to take questions if there is any.
Any questions from the council? I'll say it's been great getting to know you, and the work that you do, I think, is critically important. I do wonder so we got you at a time that, if you were still in California, your life would be very different right now or the past few weeks. So we're glad to get you when we did and use that valuable knowledge and experience that you have from your time in another state that we don't often mention here in Utah, but a fine state it is. Any questions from the council? Okay.
Thank you.
We do have a public hearing, but we need to wait until 7 p.m. since that's when the notice went out. If there's no objection, we could go on to the consent agenda and just approve that while we wait.
Works for me.
Okay, we have a few items on the consent agenda. Consider the minutes of January 21st, 2025. Consider resolution number 2025 R06, entering into an interlocal agreement with Salt Lake County for traffic signal maintenance. Consideration and approval of the 2025 fleet purchase and surplus list. And consider resolution number 2025 R08, authorizing the use of the alternative voting method of ranked choice voting for the 2025 municipal election.
Mayor, I move that we approve the consent agenda.
Second?
Okay, there is a motion and a second. Rory, will you call the roll?
Yes, Councilmember Billings,
Yes.
Glover,
Aye.
Robinson,
Aye.
Brown,
Yes.
Nicholas.
Yes.
Okay, that passes unanimously. So it looks like of those things for the public to know, we are going to use ranked choice voting for municipal elections this year, as long as the legislature allows us to. So cross fingers. We have about 90 more seconds. Probably shouldn't go on to anything else. Just, anyone have a good, where's Brad Larson when we need him?
You need to say.
This is where Rory will put in the minutes awkward silence.
Council, Mrs. Brad Larson.
There you go.
I mean, Chief did help us out last time with a joke, so.
There you go.
She just gets up and says the same one.
Should play the Jeopardy.
Why did the golfer bring an extra pair of pants with him?
Because he got a hole in one?
In case he got a hole. That's all I got. Chat GPT, thank you. All right, 7 o'clock on the dot. Public hearing. Consider ordinance number 2025-002, approving a text amendment to amend sections of Title 17 of the Midvale Municipal Code, adding new parking standards for tennis and pickleball-only commercial recreational facilities. Elizabeth, oh, you're already up there.
Yes. Just really wanted to make it worth the wait.
Very dramatic. I looked up and there she was.
Do you have it on the screen? Either way. Okay, I'll just take a look over here. Oh yeah, so this amendment creates specific parking standards for certain zones. So the mixed use, State Street commercial, transit-oriented development, Bingham Junction, Jordan Bluffs, regional commercial, clean industrial, transit-oriented development overlay zone. So we are not changing the commercial recreation facility standards. We are just proposing to add new ones for pickleball and tennis only facilities. So again, if something was a mixed kind of commercial recreation facility, they would fall under the regular category. This was prompted by an application that we received for a commercial pickleball facility in our clean industrial zone. And the space was maybe 18,000 square feet. And given that they have to meet the greatest of the standards that are listed that you see there, they would have had to provide like over 90 stalls for a 6-court facility, which just seemed really disproportionate to the amount of people that could ever use the facility at that time. So we're proposing to just have 6 parking stalls per court for both pickleball and tennis. You can have a maximum of doubles played with 4 people on the court at the same time. So we figured, you know, a parking spot for everyone, assuming they drive separately, and extra guests if you have people that are waiting to play. 6 seemed really reasonable and would still provide enough parking, but would offer some flexibility as we are seeing more of these pickleball facility specifically crop up. So that is why that came. Our Midvale City Code outlines criteria that a text amendment does need to meet in order for us to approve. Staff finds that this meets criteria number 1, that it promotes the objectives of the general plan and purposes of this title by promoting coordinated development and effective use of land use and site planning. So any questions for me? If not, I've got
So the 6 per court makes total sense to me.
Yeah.
And I generally agree with that. My only thought is, should there be sort of like a square footage number to account for employees or something along those lines, right? So like an extra, for every 10,000 square feet, 6 per court plus 5 or something like that.
Yeah.
Because if people do bring someone, or if there's like a competition, there could be more than 4. And depending on the size and if there's an event, you would, I don't know.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, we definitely talked about it. Totally up to your discretion and what you think. We put what we thought was reasonable. We figured doing it on a per court basis would be easy tracking, but we're happy to, consider any amendments you might have to this.
Do we know if any other cities have done anything similar to this? I know Sandy has some freestanding
Yes.
ball specific, so did they leave
I
it?
did not look. I'm not sure
Okay,
what they do
just
for their
curious.
parking standards. Yeah.
Any other questions for Elizabeth? Okay, this is a public hearing, so if anyone wants to make a motion to open public comment.
Mayor, I motion that we open public comment.
Second?
Okay, motion and a second. All those in favor say yes.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we are in public comment. If anyone has a comment they would like us to consider, please step up to the microphone now. Seeing none, entertain a motion to close the public comment.
Mayor, I motion we close public comment.
Second?
Okay, motion and a second. All those in favor say yes.
Aye.
Yes.
Any opposed? Okay, we are out of our public comment, and we do have a recommended motion on the board if there's any further discussion from the council. I know Councilmember Brown mentioned perhaps wanting to make some changes.
I just, 90 seems crazy, for a 6th place, but I also can see pickleball is very popular right now, more than just a few people going to play. There's a lot of competitions and whatnot, and
There's a lot of league play.
Yeah.
Which will pack those
those
courts.
spots. So I still think we should at least consider some additional, and me, it's more tied to employees or whatever, right? Like 6 per court totally makes sense. For every so many square footage, there's 5 or 6 spots. At least, so, that just seems like a good juggling, so it's not 90, what is that? 6 times 6 is,
36.
30, yeah. And then another 5 or 6, that's still substantially less. Would that fit in their plans? Does that make sense? Like, yeah, I almost think, I don't want to say that I think, I'm one of 5, but what are your guys' thoughts?
I agree. I think that's something we need to consider as well. Yeah.
I think if they're trying to track it, keep it simplified, maybe it's just 1 employee per court, so it's like 7, so 6 plus 1 employee.
And that would be the
Assuming
same
like-
number.
Yeah, like an official or someone managing it, and then you could just change the number, still have the coverage.
Can you,
Oh,
sorry, I'm getting a signal.
Sorry, far away. I was just saying, instead of trying to do it by square footage and have 2 calculations, maybe you just say account for an employee for every court. So you have
Yeah.
the 6 plus employee, and that increases it and covers maintaining the facility in addition to those participating.
I think that's a good way to do that.
Agree.
So the motion will have to be altered a bit to,
Councilmember Brown loves that.
We can't pass an ordinance until it's in writing. So if you want it done tonight, we can have that quickly done and print it out and provide it to attach to the ordinance. Or we can table this until the next meeting and then allow planning staff the opportunity to bring that ordinance before you with the adjusted.
I think if it's quick enough, if we can print it.
Or, would the development that's under consideration be hampered if we waited 2 weeks? It would be, yeah, let's print it up. if that's possible.
Was that a yes? Okay,
Yes.
okay.
They're waiting for
Your head kind of went.
Yeah.
Both. Okay, yeah, so can we print that? Well, you need us to say the new motion.
Can you print that up? I don't know what you want to say in there, so.
Yes,
I
do you
need
just
you.
want me to print like the new zones? You can change to 7 in every one, or what do you need?
Yes, so it's gotta be in writing, whatever we adopt.
What the code says has to be in writing, not the motion. Okay, I get it.
Yeah, we're not, the motion will be fine as soon as the adjustment has been made to the ordinance to match.
And we
what
can't
you guys
move
are
until she prints it?
You can table it for now if you want, and then recall that
Is that-
later in the meeting
Okay.
and then pass it.
All right, Mayor, I move that we table the public hearing and move on to the action item until later on in the meeting.
Second.
Okay, motion and a second. Do we need a roll call for that? All those in favor say yes.
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 Any opposed? No. Matt Dahl has something to say.
Well, I just want to make sure that Liz, you're good, you understand what we're,
Do you just need one copy printed?
yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we will move on then to our action item. Discuss and consider resolution number 2025 R07 acknowledging completion and receipt of fiscal year 2024 annual audit. Mariah Hill, who I know after tonight, some of the stress will leave your.
You were right into budget though, so there's, not a lot of that. My job's very cyclical. Audit, budget, budget. I will say welcome to Chris Jones, who has replaced Christian that you're used to seeing. He's our senior accountant, and he's here to see the goings on, but also he was a big help with this as well as the rest of the finance staff.
Welcome, Chris.
All right, this is a 134-page dense financial document that really no one should read. I mean, you should if you want to, but it's terrible, and I'm sorry, I have to read it every year and make it every year. So I'm going to just quickly go through the sections of the report, and then we'll just do a quick recap of kind of where we're left at the end of fiscal year 2024. So these are the sections of the report. I'll go through them piece by piece, but this is called our annual comprehensive financial report. We put it together by the criteria of the Government Finance Officers Association and submit it to receive their certificate of excellence every year, and we have done that this year as well. So in the introductory section, we have the transmittal letter, which has audit requirements, the introduction of our auditors, a profile of Midvale, factors affecting our financial condition, and our long-term financial planning, has our certificate of achievement for the previous year, which we did get for 2023, has an organizational chart, and the elected and appointed officials as of fiscal year end, which was June 30th, 2024, excuse me. In the financial section, we have the independent auditor's report, as well as the management's discussion and analysis. The GFOA is very specific about what's allowed in the management discussion and analysis. It's supposed to be objective and easily readable analysis of the financial activities, and then we'll have summaries of significant events and changes and financial highlights. The basic financial statements, we have the government-wide, which includes both the governmental funds and the proprietary funds. Those will be called governmental and business-type activities. That's essentially the governmental funds include the general fund, our RDA, the MBA, and our capital projects, and the proprietary funds are really all of our enterprise funds, water, sewer, stormwater, those things. The notes to the financial statements are an in-depth explanation to the financial statements. They have our significant accounting policies, a reconciliation of government statements to fund statements, information on our deposits and investments, capital assets, debt, and our pension plan. In our required supplementary information, we have pension disclosures. That a lot of that information related to pension comes from URS. And then it also has our schedule of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance, budget, and actuals for the general fund and the RDA. In our supplementary information, we have non-major governmental funds financial statements, so the funds that don't, they're not significant enough to be a part of the major funds, and then also proprietary fund. These get reported all together in the governmental fund statements and then broken down in this section. And then the statistical section, which has operational, economic, and historical data for the past 10 years for the city. This includes financial trends, revenue capacity, debt capacity, demographic and economic information, and operating information. And this is the one section of the ACFR that is not covered by the auditor's purview. And then there's a few more reports from the auditors, internal control and compliance reports are in there as well. So quickly for the financial results that came out of this. So in the general fund, our fund balance increased $32,790. This, we really had a greater increase, but the state only allows a 35% fund balance, and so we did have just under a $2 million transfer into the capital projects fund to make sure we maintain that. And then really our revenues and expenditures were about both $1 million over and under what they were budgeted to be. And then I said $4 million in transfers both to our debt service, internal service, and capital projects funds. The RDA had an increase in their fund balance of just over $2 million. There's a lot, this is spread across all of the RDA funds, and they are budgeting to use a lot of that. Some housing money gets passed through that they can't spend every year, but you can see in the 25 budget, they budgeted $5 million worth of fund balance to be spent. And then some of that too, we're just working on the budget amendment now for this year, and that, or for fiscal year 2025, and that will have some carry forwards and things for projects that couldn't be completed in fiscal year 2024. For the capital projects fund, our revenues exceeded our expenditures by $1.9 million, and that is essentially the transfer from the general fund to the capital projects fund at the end of the year. In the water fund, we look at the enterprise funds a little bit differently in that their fund balance is their current assets less their current liabilities, and we also look at that in how many days of working capital does that leave the city in our fund balance. So were their revenues to be completely cut off, how many days of operation could we fund? And there's a few weird things in the water fund. What we're showing here doesn't include the ARPA funds, which we've kind of been looking not past, but they do weird things. They're unearned revenue in our financial statements, and it's very accounty. That's their governmenty accounty. So they're not shown here, but we are spending them in fiscal year 25, so that will be good. And then this does include we bonded in 2023, so there was a significant increase in the water fund, but as we look towards building new public works building and things, some of that will be taken. So we're not quite meeting our financial policy goal of 180 days, but we did have a significant increase to 160 here. In the sewer fund, we did have a slight increase in our ending balance, but a decrease of working capital. This just happens because our operating costs increase this year and every year, essentially. The stormwater fund had a decrease both in working capital and in fund balance. This is although we still met our working capital goal, the stormwater fund, as you guys know, is undergoing, we're looking at fee schedules, and so this one's kind of just in limbo, but should be sorted, and we should be back on a good trajectory when that's all sorted. The street lighting fund and sanitation fund both had an increase of available working capital and meet the goal that we have for them. And our internal service funds, we don't look at working capital. These ones just assess a user charge to the different departments for operating capital, and they both had an increase in their fund balance. We keep fund balance in these because we're building that up to pay for replacement of vehicles and equipment for IT through the year. So these fluctuate based on what are our replacement needs each fiscal year. Any questions? Okay, well, that's that. I'm going to hand it over to Marcus from Kennington and Christensen, who has our auditors this year. He'll present kind of their information and findings for you guys.
Thank you, Mariah, and welcome, Marcus.
All right, I'd like to thank the council for the opportunity to audit Midvale City's financial statements. But part of an audit, we're required to report several things to governance, and we consider the council and mayor to be governance. But part of your responsibility is to oversee the financial reporting process, where management is responsible for the financial statements. And an audit does not relieve governance or management of those responsibilities. And so as auditors, we plan and perform an audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards and government auditing standards. And then we issue an opinion and then a couple of reports. The opinion is an unmodified or a clean opinion that we've issued. And that opinion, it's on the basic financial statements, which includes the footnotes. There's Mariah did a great job going through the whole report, but there's other supplemental schedules that we aren't part of the audit, but they're still, we review them and make sure that they're in line with the audited financial statements, like the MD&A. We're going to go through that and make sure all the numbers match up to the actual financial statements, and same thing with those supplemental schedules. Ray also said, the statistical section and the introduction is not audited. But the important part is we've issued a clean opinion on the financial statements. The next report that we issue is a report on the internal controls with government auditing standards. This is part of the audit. But we analyze the internal controls that are directly related to the financial reporting process. And so we look at all your controls related to cash receipting, cash disbursement, payroll, and then the financial close process. I'm happy to report, we feel good about the internal controls in place. There's checks and balances, there's separation of duties. So we do not have any recommendations related to the internal controls. The third report that we issue is a report on state compliance. And this comes from the state auditor's office. So every year, normally around May, they'll send out the new state compliance guide. And this is what we go through and do those different tests of state compliance. And this year we looked at budgetary compliance, fund balance, we looked at some justice courts compliance, we looked at restricted taxes and revenues, we looked at the fraud risk assessment, government fees, did some tests on the Utah retirement system, and in the Open and Public Meetings Act. And overall, the city did a great job on state compliance. There was one small finding related to the Open and Public Meetings Act. This act, it covers quite a bit in there, but the one finding that we do have is that one of the meeting minutes, once they're approved, there's 3 business days. After 3 business days, they need to be submitted to the Utah Public Notice website. There's one that took a little bit longer than the 3 days, and in my mind, that's pretty good. So we just encourage that to get reported within 3 days. But any questions about any of those reports or that finding?
Any questions for Marcus?
Okay, and also, all the significant accounting policies, they're disclosed in footnote 1. We feel the city has a reliable accounting system and sound accounting policies. We didn't have any, difficulties or anything out of the ordinary in performing the audit. No disagreements with management. We take our fraud procedures very seriously. We ask questions to council members, management, employees. We do different journal entry tests. We have meetings as auditors, and I'm glad to report we don't see any instance of fraud. We didn't notice anything like that. But just like to thank Mariah and Chris for all the work that they did. I mean, they did a great job getting everything ready for the audit, and it helps with that audit go smoothly. But thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for all the work that you guys did for the audit. We appreciate it. Paul, did you want to say something, because you're one of the
Audit
representatives?
committee, yeah. Okay, I'll go.
And Heidi?
Well, we'd like to thank you for your audit and the findings that you found. That gives us confidence that our staff is doing a good job. And I'd like to thank our staff, being part of the audit committee, that they do a great job, and they're concerned about how we use our money and how we receive it and spend it back out. We appreciate you.
Right.
Good staff.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think it says a lot that the people that come in and audit speak so highly of our staff. So just, again, just gratitude to you guys for always upholding the best that we can provide for our residents. And thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. This is an action item. Mariah, I don't know if you have anything else to add. Are you good to go? Okay. It is an action item, and wait to see. Did we have a motion in the packet? Or someone,
Oh, sorry,
that's okay. You had
there
audit.
should be one on staff report. I'm ready.
Yeah, go for it.
Mayor, I move we approve Resolution 2025-R07, acknowledging completion of the fiscal year 2024 audit and the direct that notice be published pursuant to Section 10.6.152 of the Utah Code.
Second?
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Rory, will you call the roll?
Yes, Councilmember Glover.
Aye.
Robinson.
Aye.
Brown.
Yes.
Mikuláš. Yes. And Billings.
Yes.
Okay, that passes unanimously. Audit officially acknowledged. We did have a new proposed ordinance. Has everyone had a chance to look at that up here? Okay, we can go back to our public hearing action item. If anyone is willing to make a motion, it
We have
is.
to go back into the public hearing?
No, the public comment was open and closed.
Okay.
So, because your motion was to come back to it, we're coming back to it.
Do a motion to go back to it is my question.
Oh.
You're welcome to untable the item.
Okay. Mayor, I move that we untable ordinance number 2025-0-2 approving a text amendment to amend, or sections of Title 17 of the Midvale Municipal Code, adding new parking standards for tennis and pickleball, only commercial recreational facilities.
Second.
Motion and a second to return to our public hearing item, and all those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Any opposed? Okay, we are back into public hearing, item A, and we have an action item if anyone is willing to make that motion.
Mayor, I move that we approve ordinance number 2025-0-02 approving a text amendment to amend sections of Title 17 of the Midvale Municipal Code, adding new parking standards for tennis and pickleball only commercial recreational facilities.
Second.
Okay,
I just said that.
good job. We have a motion and a second. Rory, roll call vote.
Councilmember Robinson.
Aye.
Brown.
Yes.
Mikuláš. Yes. Billings.
Yes.
And Glover.
Aye.
Okay, that passes unanimously. Moving through the agenda, we will now go to our one and only discussion item tonight. And Garrett Wilcox, our city attorney, will be taking us through the very exciting open meeting, social media, and grandma training. And I will note that this is my fourth one of the year.
So now that, we're to the most exciting part of the meeting. Last year I was told I wasn't exciting enough, so I've had some really good transitions. A throwback to like 6th grade when PowerPoint became a thing. I promise those are the only transitions that you'll have to endure the rest of the presentation. But we are going to cover a few things. I know they're dry. I know that they're not exciting. One of them is required by law, so I'm sorry. And then the rest of them are generally, we've found to be good reminders for city council to just be reminded of some of these things. Because I think unless your name is Rory or Garrett, you probably aren't thinking about these on a daily basis. And we are. So tonight we're going to talk about the Open Public Meetings Act. This is the one that you have to pay attention to by law and certify that you did this training every year. Then we're going to talk about the Government Records Access and Management Act. I'm going to refer to it as GRAMA, not to be confused with grandma. And then we're going to talk about social media because since the last year we did this training, things have changed. The Supreme Court has spoken. I can give you more definitive things to think about as you're doing your own social media. And then you're going to be disappointed because some things haven't changed. And then just a reminder about my role and my relationship with you as a council. So this is how I want you to feel tonight. And I know this is how we're all feeling. And Glenn and Mariah have all made this very apparent throughout the day. So thank you. So, Open Public Meetings Act. This generally, the policy from our state legislature is that the public's business is done before the public, right? So the whole point is that deliberations, actions done by the city council, the decisions that are being made that affect our community are being done in such a way that everyone has the opportunity, not necessarily to participate, but to at least observe and make sure that government is being run in such a way that we're following the laws and so on. And so you are going to see this thread kind of throughout, especially with some of the changes that were made in the last year's legislative session. So for those who were attended the training last year, you'll notice that I don't have a definition of what a meeting is not. That is gone. So before, it used to talk about things with casual social encounters or chance social encounters and things like that. That is dead. It is no more. And now there's a very specific definition of what a meeting is. So it has to be convened by an individual with the authority to convene it, and it has to be done for the express purpose of receiving public comment, deliberating, or taking action over a relevant matter. I think for most people, when they saw this change, they're like, oh great, we don't have to worry about can we all attend a ribbon cutting ceremony without having to public notice it, things like that. And you don't, because it's not a meeting. But this is what has been added. So this is now all of the things, rather than trying to determine whether or not you're in a meeting, this is what the state has added instead. So now a meeting is very specific. We're in a meeting right now. When you guys walk out into the parking lot and the meeting is adjourned, you no longer meet the definition of being in a meeting, even if you're in a quorum, right? We don't have to go through that analysis. But instead, we now need to look at what are you doing when you're interacting. So now under the Open Public Meetings Act, a quorum of you cannot act together outside of a meeting in a concerted and deliberate way to predetermine an action to be taken by the public body at a meeting on a relevant matter. So in other words, even if you're at a friend's birthday party, you're all allowed to be there. We don't need to do a public notice, anything like that. But you can't be sitting around as a quorum discussing, hey, I saw this coming up on the next agenda. Let's talk about what we want to have happen or whatever. That can't be done. So essentially the same outcome, but you don't have to go through the meeting analysis. You now just need to figure out, are there three of you that are communicating in a way that you're determining what the outcome of an item is going to be. So other fun things with open public meetings, stuff that Rory stresses about. So every time we have a public meeting, we have to give 24 hours advance notice of that public meeting. And the notice has to include the date, time, place, and agenda for the meeting. I know this always causes some frustration sometimes with either the city council or the public when a packet doesn't go out necessarily with the notice. You'll see that state law doesn't actually require that the packet be provided beforehand, only the agenda. So all of the different staff reports and things like that, we try as staff to put that out ahead of time so that everyone has an opportunity to be prepared. The public has an idea of more in depth of what we're going to be discussing. But by state law, we're not required to do that. We are going above and beyond when we do that. We're happy to do that. But there may be times where, due to emergencies or whatever it may be, we are trying to comply with the law, get that agenda out in 24 hours, and additional information will come as we have it. And we are not violating the Open Public Meetings Act when that happens. The agenda does need to reasonably specify the topics that are being discussed. When new things come before you as a city council that are not on the agenda, you're welcome to discuss it, but you cannot take a final action. So if someone during public comment comes before you, says, I have this concern, you're welcome to discuss it, give staff direction, but we can't pass a resolution, we can't pass an ordinance, we can't create a new policy, we can't sign a new contract or something along those lines as a final action to address it. But you can tell staff, I want to see that on the agenda next time as an action item, or I want to see this outcome that staff brings back as an action item, or as some sort of step for you to take in the next meeting, even if it's we want it on a discussion item so we can flush this out a little bit more, whatever it may be. So only the items that are on the agenda can you take official action on. One of the other things that I think there's always some confusion about is the difference between a public hearing and a public meeting. Right now, we're in a public meeting. We are not in a public hearing. You did have a public hearing tonight, which was part of the public meeting. And to distinguish between those two things, public meeting does not require public comment. It is open to the public. We provide the notice, we have the agenda, and the public is welcome to come and observe that meeting. A public hearing is specifically a portion of a public meeting where public comment is required. We have the obligation to allow the public, by law, to be able to provide their input on a specific item. So a lot of things that we'll see that for our planning staff, pretty much everything that they bring is almost always a public hearing because they're making land use adjustments. You'll see it with when we pass our budget, truth and taxation, things along those lines. Those are also common items that come before you that require a public hearing. But again, public meeting doesn't equal public hearing, and a public hearing in and of itself is part of the public meeting. Closed meetings. So closed meetings are limited, and this is where we can meet with you as staff, or you can meet with one another in a setting that is not open to the public. It requires a 2/3 vote of the entire council, so 4 of the 5 of you have to vote to enter the closed hearing, and you have to specify the reason why you're going into the closed hearing. There's a number of provided reasons under state code. I've put the most common ones, so the discussion of character, professional competence, physical or mental health of an individual, discussing imminent litigation or real estate transactions. Those are the ones that we most typically enter closed sessions for, but there's a number of other things. I think in this last year when we talked about some of the security measures here at City Hall and some of our strategies that we talked about with the police, that was another opportunity for us to close that meeting so that we could have that discussion in a way that we're not broadcasting it to someone who wants to hurt any one of us of how that happens. When we're in a closed session, again, discussion can happen, direction may be given to staff, but no formal action item may be taken in the sense of an ordinance, resolution, rule, contract, etc. that cannot be approved in a closed session. In those instances, we'll exit a closed session. Hopefully it is on the agenda, and then we will pass it in an open meeting. So common violations. Obviously, we saw the intent. The intent is to do the public's meeting in front of the public. So when there's deliberation that's going on via electronic communication, so email, Teams, texting or whatnot amongst the council during a public meeting, that's also a no-no because the public is not listening to what that deliberation is. Especially under the prior definition of meeting, it was the after meeting where a quorum sticks around to discuss what just happened in that meeting and then talk about how to deal with things like that in the future. Obviously, we're not looking at it from a meeting context anymore, but again, is there a quorum who's deliberating, making decisions about future actions of the city council, of things that are going to come before it? As we just heard, we have to provide minutes, and those have certain posting requirements, so generally within 3 business days, and then the pending minutes within a certain period of time as well. And as you are all familiar, this is one of your favorite parts, is to read through everything that was said or not said, and then pass that in your consent agenda every week or every meeting. There are some real consequences to violating the Open Public Meetings Act. So some of those are, if you make a decision and you violated the Open Public Meetings Act, someone can file a lawsuit and void that action, completely undo it. They can also compel us to comply or enjoin us from making future violations, probably the ones that you guys care most about, because those things are all embarrassing, and there was a recent lawsuit in which this happened, where a decision was voided, and in the closed meeting, because they did not go into it correctly, everything that was discussed in the closed meeting was made public. So things that the council thought would be under wraps suddenly are available for everyone to read and hear. But the bigger thing is when there is a closed meeting violation, Matt, myself, Rory, the other members of the staff, we aren't criminally liable for it. As members of the council, you are. So if you intentionally enter a closed meeting knowing that it's not a legitimate reason to go into a closed meeting, there is a risk of a Class B misdemeanor. Any questions?
Any questions for Garrett? I did have 2 questions. You said the chance social encounter is gone, but we shouldn't act in a way that is deliberating an issue that is before the council. So some of that, like, what about an issue that we don't know will be before the council, but could very well, because, when elected officials get together, that tends to be what we talk about, is issues impacting the community or other communities. So rather than say, like, what'd you think about that rezone request from last meeting? But if you're just talking generally about development in Salt Lake County, is that okay?
Salt Lake County, probably. Midvale becomes a little bit harder, right? Mainly in the sense of you have the authority to put things on the agenda, and you also have the authority to determine what those laws ultimately end up being. The Planning Commission, for example, makes a recommendation to you, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's the City Council to decide exactly what they want the law to be. And they can ignore the recommendation of the Planning Commission, they can accept the recommendation of the Planning Commission. And so I think with the hypothetical you gave, if it's Salt Lake County, have at it. If it's, I don't like this and I think this should change in Midvale, you have the ability to put it before your body, and you are the decision makers for that, and so I would caution against it.
The second question, you said, obviously no texting, like, hey, what are you going to do? How are you going to vote on this issue? But if someone texts me during a council meeting, as mayor, part of the job is to run the council meeting. So if someone texts me or sends me a Teams message and says, hey, can we have a 5-minute bathroom break? That's acceptable because it's not deliberating on an issue. It's just like fact-finding kind of.
So so I'm going to give you my attorney answer as someone who
You're the worst.
I believe, yes, I am the worst. But as someone who my thought is to be the most conservative point of view, right? I would suggest if you're asking for a bathroom break and the motion's going to be made anyways, to just simply ask openly before everyone, can I have a recess for 5 minutes? Rather than going through you. And the reason that that one sounds maybe stupid is because there are instances in which you are the tie-breaking vote. So even in an instance where it may seem to be, mayor is not going to be able to vote on this, so I don't need to consider him part of the quorum or anything like that. If someone ends up recusing themselves or leaving for an emergency and suddenly we have a 2-2 vote, now suddenly Mayor Gettle is part of the deciding body, and now we have a record of deliberation going on ex parte outside of what the public is aware of.
Hopefully there wouldn't be a tie vote for bathroom break or not. I would always vote in favor of bathroom break.
I'm never going to vote in favor now.
All right, any other questions for Garrett? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I know this is where we're at in the meeting, so now we'll move on to another fun one. Government Records Access Management Act. So we're talking about the law, we're not talking about grandma. So, and this, I mean, I've mentioned this already today to the mayor and to Councilwoman Billings. Sometimes when I forget to take off my work hat when I go home, my wife gets really confused why I'm complaining about grandma issues, and I have to remind her it's not a grandma issue, it's a grandma issue. And these are the things that I stress about when I go home. So, again, legislative intent, very similar to Open Public Meetings Act. The public should have a right to see how their government is operating, what is going on, the communications that are happening, the decisions that are being made, the records that are being kept, and so on. There are exceptions, though. Same way with the Open Public Meetings Act. We don't want to have to provide security information to everyone of this is where our safe is located and here's all the passwords for you to be able to log into it and take money, so on. So obvious reasons why some records are not available to the public. But in general, there's an interest in a lot of the work we do, including our communications. If we create a record, it's available to the public unless it's specifically identified as not being public. So record means pretty much anything you can think of, whether it's electronic or physical, or in some cases, microfiche. What else do we have hidden in our probably old videotapes if they exist, photos? I mean, pretty much if there is any sort of information that can be transmitted in any sort of medium, it is probably considered a record. There are a list of things that are not records. So I've only put some of the ones that you probably see or some of our staff see on a regular basis. If your significant other, child, whoever, friend sends you a personal note at work and says, hey, I'm sorry you're having a crappy day, that's not a public record. Copyrighted or patented materials, so especially for our planning, zoning, our building officials and so on, certain parts of that packet that get submitted to them are public, certain parts are not because they're copyrighted. The architect has a copyright on the design that they've created and so on. Drafts are not considered records. The final document is, but a draft is not. So someone does have to go through a process in order to be able to get access to these records or to be able to review them. They submit a request to Rory. We have a certain timeline, generally 10 business days, to be able to respond unless it's expedited or there's a reason They either need to pay a certain amount of money because their request is so voluminous, or we just don't have the staff resources to be able to respond within that time. They do have to request records with reasonable specificity, so we need to be able to identify what they're requesting. So things like all communications ever from every city employee or citizen, probably something we're not going to be able to be responsive to and ask them to narrow it down. Now, if someone that says, every time Garrett's been mentioned between communications between staff within the last year, yeah, that probably is something that can be grandma. So, again, these are examples of common records that we have as a government that are open to the public. Laws, final opinions, correspondence, and so on. The reason that I mentioned the correspondence is that's probably the types of records that you as council members and elected officials are involved with most. Rory has certain responsibilities to keep copies of the ordinances, resolutions, and so on. You don't need to worry about that. But a lot of the emails that you receive from your constituents, text messages, and so on, those are when you're wearing your city council member or mayor hat, you are now in a possession of a public record. When you respond to them, you have created a public record. So the exceptions, there's private records, controlled records, and protected records. These are all set by statute. Generally, private records are things like social security numbers, medical records, driver's license numbers, and so on. Controlled is very specific. I am not aware of a time that we've ever had a controlled record here at Midvale, but if you worked, for example, for the University of Utah Health System, these are probably a lot of the types of records that you're dealing with. And then protected records, this is probably what we see also a decent amount of. So when people submit bids or things like that and say the pricing is proprietarily protected, that's where that would fit under attorney-client privileged information, work product for me, and so on. That's the category that fits under. We follow the state retention cycle for our records. So I think this last month we just went through a citywide shred day, where if those records were no longer required to be retained, we destroyed them. Some records we can never get rid of. So they either go to the archives, they stay here a lot. Again, I know planning and zoning is probably sick of me saying this, but like subdivision approvals and things like that, those are records that we keep on a permanent basis. One thing to keep in mind is as much control as we have over our records, to some extent we don't. So we get to make certain decisions initially about whether we release information or we retain information or we redact information or things along those lines. But there is a process to go before a judge or the State Records Committee, and they have the ability to overrule any decision we make. And so they can determine this is a record that is public and you just need to provide it, or there's also a balancing test laid out in the law that says if there's a greater public interest in knowing it than there is in one of these other categories, then it can be released. That's probably why for sometimes when you're watching body cam videos of police shootings or things that have happened within days, the previous days, that's probably the way that happened, is they went through this balancing test, and on a number of times people are going to say this is probably protected because there's still an ongoing criminal investigation, but the belief is that the public interest outweighs the benefit of that interest. So what does this mean? It means that even if I tell you it's protected, private, so on, I can't promise you that it won't become public. And so someone else may decide that that is a public record and may release it. So we even included in our contracts with our contractors that when they ask us to keep things confidential, we say we'll do what we can under the law, but because we're subject to grandma, we can't promise that we're going to be able, with 100% surety, be able to keep your confidential information confidential, because that's out of our control. So enforcement, people can look at it, change their mind, so on. Probably the ones that people most care about is there are criminal penalties also attached, and this is for everyone who works here. And probably the two ways that these criminal penalties can happen, these are just two of several. But if you intentionally release one of those protected records or private records or controlled records, knowing that it's that, right, and you intentionally release it, it's a Class B misdemeanor. If you also refuse to release a record which is required to be released, it's a Class B misdemeanor. So just be aware of that. And for me, I can lose my job if I do this wrong. I can be terminated or suspended if I'm violating grandma. Any questions?
Questions for Garrett?
I have a question about, like, text messages, for example, if you're texting. If you delete it, I mean, what are the responsibilities of keeping, how long you have to keep it? I just got a new phone, everything delete, those kinds of things. Is there a consequence to any of that?
Yeah, so I mean, if you're destroying government records, that's obviously a problem. So our retention schedule goes through how long those different records have to be retained. And so I would encourage you, if you have specific questions about specific records, to talk to Rory or her staff, and they can help identify what record set this falls under and then what's our obligation. So for your example, it's one of the reasons that I actually have this front one, if I don't screw this up. So transitory correspondence, right? So probably a lot of our day-to-day text messages, Teams messages, and so on, we are to retain it until the resolution of the issue and then destroy records. So if it's resolved with your response, you don't need to keep it. If it's potentially a highly controversial issue that may go on for some time, then you're obligated to retain it until that issue's been resolved.
Any other questions for Garrett? Thank you. And we have social media policy as well. Is that?
Not social media policy, but just some social media training.
Okay.
So, social media in general. Courts have found when we engage on social media, we're essentially creating a public forum. So this means that we can't discriminate against people who are engaging on that forum or their viewpoint. For our purposes, Laura cares about this the most, right? Because she's our communication person. Every time someone gets on there and says something negative about Midvale, we can't block that individual, we can't delete their comments, we can't do anything along those lines. There are certain things that we can limit if they fall outside of our social media policy. I'm not really going to go into that. I'm just going to really just talk about blocking or deleting things. So if we block someone because we don't like what they say, that's a problem. If we delete their comments because we don't like what they say, or we're hiding their comments because we don't like what they say, that's a problem. We're violating their First Amendment. Generally with elected officials, up until the last year, this has been a split circuit issue where two different circuits were saying different things about how elected officials should act on social media. And so this is the update. The Supreme Court has finally spoken, and they have said that elected officials obviously have First Amendment rights as well. So you are allowed to speak in your personal capacity. You are not always wearing your Midvale City hat every time you talk. And you're allowed to talk about public affairs in your personal capacity. So not every statement by a government official is an official government statement. But sometimes when you do speak, because you do make decisions on behalf of the city, you are creating essentially a public forum for that issue, if that makes sense. So you are speaking with the authority of the state. So the test that the Supreme Court has sent back to the lower courts to look at some of these cases is, does the official have actual authority? So I can't pretend to say, as the city attorney of Midvale, I, Garrett Wilcox, do solemnly declare Midvale X or whatever, right? I don't have that authority. And just because I say it on Facebook or X or Instagram doesn't make it so. Now, that being said, some of you may have that authority depending on what your responsibilities are. And so if you have actual authority, you pass that first part of the test, right? And then the second part is, do you purport to exercise that authority? So if you are saying, as a city council member, I am doing X, you've now passed both parts of that test probably, right? And you've now created some sort of this public forum on your page, your social media account or whatnot, that you get treated the same way as a government entity. You get treated the same way we do because you are us. And so you can't block people, you can't delete people's comments. Now, if you don't have the authority to do it, you can't pass that first part of the test. Or if you're making it clear, I am not speaking on behalf of the city council. I am speaking as a resident of this neighborhood who is concerned about this issue, and this is what I have to say. You're not passing that second part of the test, right? So those are the new guidelines. Those are the two questions that when a court is looking at whether or not you're engaging in speech and need to be treated the same way as the rest of the city, those are the questions that courts are going to be asking of whatever your communication is on social media. So I'm going to skip this for a second and I'll come back. So these lists are very much the same that you saw me present last year. So even though I can provide you a clear rule of what the Supreme Court or any other court is going to be looking at, the recommendations remain the same. So keep separate private and public social media accounts. If you want to have a city council, mayor one, that's absolutely great. But I would encourage you not to mix it with your personal stuff. If you don't want to be friends with everyone, if you want to be able to block people, if you want to delete comments, keep that to your private page. And then on your public page, unfortunately, it will be a little bit of, you're going to have a tough skin if someone comes back to you, because you're probably not going to be able to block that person or their comment. The only thing that has really changed is adding a disclaimer to your personal page. So just make it clear, this isn't a foolproof process to keep you safe from being able to do whatever you want on your personal page. But it does add another layer that the Supreme Court has said that they would look at, is if you're saying, hey, this page is just for me to spout off my thoughts as an individual, not as a city council member, that's going to be something that they're going to take into consideration. Again, not foolproof, but definitely helps balance that more in your favor. And for that reason, I'm going to read one sentence from the Supreme Court decision. And so, like I said, this is not Garrett speaking as Garrett. This is Garrett relaying what the law is. And this is what the Supreme Court said. A public official who fails to keep personal posts in a clearly designated personal account therefore exposes himself to greater potential liability. So even the Supreme Court is saying, if you want to be safe as an elected official, keep two separate accounts and don't commingle those things. Otherwise, some court is going to get into a very fact-specific analysis of whether or not you're doing that and whether or not you have the right to do so. Matt, you look like you have a question.
Yeah, just sometimes mistakes happen, And so if someone were to make a clearly public statement, maybe even saying, as a city council member, I want this thing or whatever, but they put it on their private account that has the disclaimer and all that kind of stuff, how do they purify that? Or, I mean, can they go delete that as long as they repost it on the public one? Do they write, oops, I didn't mean to do this, by it? And then, I mean, does that then how often could that happen before the private one is started to consider to be the public one?
Those are questions the Supreme Court did not answer. So I can't give you specific advice other than just please don't. I mean, their thought is they're going to look into it on a case-by-case, fact-by-fact scenario, which in some ways is great, right? If you can say, hey, this was a mess up, maybe you get the benefit of the doubt. But if you're consistently messing up, then the Supreme Court or whatever court is reviewing it is probably going to be more suspicious of, was this a mistake, or are you just trying to bypass and violate someone's First Amendment rights? So, again, my preference, please don't. So now I'm going to go back. So the couple things to remember. I know a lot of you are active on Facebook or different social media sites, and I know that you're very responsive to the public. Be careful that you don't start deliberating with a quorum on these threads where you start promising that the city council is going to take certain actions, because that's illegal. And you're welcome to tell people, hey, we'll put it on the agenda and we'll discuss it as a city council, or here as me is what I would like to see come out of it. But just please be careful that we don't have 3 city council members on a social media platform that appear to be exchanging ideas and coming up with some sort of solution to a problem on social media. The other thing to Matt's point, which is another funky issue, is if you speak in your official capacity on your private page, you may have created a grammable record, and one that you need to retain for whatever the retention schedule is. And so that's, again, part of my plea is please don't. It's a lot easier if we don't have to ask the hypotheticals and figure it out than if it does happen and then we're trying to figure out how to navigate this issue and we honestly just don't have a lot of guidance on what that looks like, because we just barely got a test for whether or not you're even speaking in your official capacity or your personal capacity last year. So,
Garrett,
yes.
hypothetically speaking, if someone was really, really, really active on Twitter, even for Midvale purposes, and then when the owner of Twitter became a quasi-government entity, decided to delete every tweet ever and the account itself, would that be problematic? I'm asking for Dustin, he did this. I'm just kidding. Like, I didn't even consider this because I feel like the government holding all of my information was bad. All right. That's all. Okay. I didn't even think about it till this second.
I mean, I would guess that the court is not going to see X regardless of who owns it unless it's the United States government who owns it. Again, people wearing separate hats doing separate things. But yeah, that is one thing. If you are thinking about deleting social media or things along those lines of things you've done in your public capacity wearing your city council hat, my recommendation would be to talk to Rory first and see what options there are so we can determine what needs to be retained and for how long. And we at least have a copy of those records if you end up shutting down that account or whatever it may be. Any other questions? Okay, so I promise we're close. Now, everyone else, the very last thing we're going to talk about of my role with you. What's my relationship with the council, the elected officials, staff, and so on. This is where things get very weird, just to be completely honest. I represent the organization as a whole, so I essentially represent an idea. I don't represent any one of you or a person or things like that. I do not represent a tangible client per se. I represent the city. So that means most of the time that the city council, I do the will of the city council because the city council makes the final decision on behalf of the city of what it's going to do. There are instances where that may not be the case. So when I go through this process, I have to think of who ultimately has the final authority on something. So for example, if something is put to a vote and the city council does not agree with what the public has voted for, my obligation is not to support you. My obligation is to support the will of the people as expressed through that vote, because they have the final authority on that matter. So, again, this is where things get really weird, is most of the time I do what you tell me to do, but there are some instances where I am not responsive or responsible to you because in that moment you do not represent the client. So, what does that mean? For what my hope is, your takeaway is a lot of times before there's a problem, our interests are all aligned regardless of my client wants to see everyone do their jobs legally, correctly, and so on. And so when someone comes and asks for legal advice in that time, I'm providing legal advice because I'm providing it to someone who is involved or someone with my client, right? It becomes more of a problem, though, when the problem has come into existence and then someone comes and asks me for legal advice. Depending on the nature of the problem, you may not be my client. I may represent someone or something other than you. And so my plea to you is, before we have problems, please come talk to me while our interests are all aligned and I can help navigate issues and I can be your attorney and we can have those conversations and we can get things done and I can help you get where you're going. But if there is a problem, there's a chance that my client's interests are adverse to your interests, in which case I represent the city and I will be informing you that you may need to seek your own legal advice because I can't provide that legal advice to you because there's a conflict of interest. So that's just something to be aware of. I can be a lot more helpful before a problem, after a problem. I am unfortunately doing a lot of ethical analysis of, can I represent you right now with whatever hat you're wearing? In a similar vein, that attorney-client privilege, it's something we rely on a lot to be able to speak frankly, to be able to talk about what are the impacts of litigation, statutory changes, how should you be doing things, and so on. And that privilege extends to my client, which is the city. It also means, though, because I do not have an individual attorney-client relationship with any of you or with any staff member, when I speak to people, that privilege is shared amongst everyone who needs to know and has the authority to make that decision, if that makes sense. So if you come to me and say, hey, I need some legal advice, and it's something that I can answer because you're wearing your Midvale City hat and whatnot, and so I respond, it means everyone else who has the same authority to that information is entitled to receive that same information and also know the nature of that conversation. So that's just to say, when you come speak with me in my office, there is no privilege between me and any one of you individually. And if another city council member or the mayor or the city manager or something along those lines comes and asks me, hey, what did you just speak about? Good chance if you're sitting on this dais, I have an obligation to be able to tell that person as well just what happened, because they have the same amount of authority as anyone else, right, to make their decisions.
That's not the same thing as saying that anyone who comes and asks you a question or has an issue, you'll evaluate whether or not that's information that needs to go out. But it's not like, I'm trying to think of an example without making people think it's a thing that has happened. But let's, Dustin comes to you and says, sorry, the mayor comes to you and says, I would like to do X, tell me what the legal ramifications are of that. I don't want anyone to think that you are then obligated to then go to everyone and say, I had a conversation with the mayor, he said this, now you're aware. There might be instances of that, but it's not the same. You're saying that everyone has the rights to it is not the same thing as saying that you are going to disseminate all of that information every time someone asks.
That's correct. I mean, unless you want to change that policy to say anytime you have a conversation with anyone, Garrett, that's attorney-client, please let us know. Obviously, you're the city council and you are 90% of the time in charge of whatever that looks like. So unfortunately, at some of my conferences, when we've gone through this training, there are city attorneys and city attorneys' staff who have had to do exactly that because the environment amongst the elected officials is so toxic that the only way for the attorney to maintain the trust of their client is to essentially say, here are all the conversations that I'm having with everyone. So that way everyone is aware of what's going on. Gratefully, we're not in that position, and that's not to say that I want to be in that position, and I'm not saying this because of this. It's just one of those things of, I think it's helpful to know and helpful to be conscious of, so that way if there's conversations we need to have, great, but just also understand what that also means as well. That I'm just doing my job. If someone comes along and you're like, hey, I thought that was between the two of us, good chance it's not. It also means, though, again, talking about who's the client, I know we have an election year coming up, and so specifically with election-related things, this will often be a time where you are not a client when you are a candidate. So just something to be aware of. I can provide generic legal advice that not legal advice. I can provide generic legal guidance in the sense of I can refer you to statutes, I can refer you to documents or things like that that may be able to answer your question, but because you are not my client, I can't give you attorney-client privilege information. There is no privilege. I also can't give you legal advice either. So that's just one of those things to be aware of, is that's going to be a very real thing here in a matter of months, of where in that capacity, when you're wearing that hat of I am a private citizen running for the elected office that I currently have or whatnot, that I can't provide legal advice to you as a candidate, if that makes sense. Okay. So now that I can see everyone's look of excitement, any other questions?
I have one question on that last item. Can you just give an example of an issue where if the council were unanimous in a decision that they made, or a direction they wanted the city to go in, where you said, 90% of the time you would then advocate for that position? So what are some examples of the 10% where even though the council and mayor might be unanimous on something, where you would not represent that interest?
So a couple that immediately come to mind, and 10% is probably too generous. I'm just throwing out stupid statistics. So the two things that I can think of, I swore an oath, the same oath that you swore, that if the council and the mayor specifically decide to do something unconstitutional, I swore an oath to protect the residents of Midvale and protect the Constitution. And so that may be an instance where my client's wishes, my client's interests, which is Midvale City, do not align with what the city council and mayor want to do. So that may be an example. The other one that I think most commonly happens is, like I talked about, if something is referred or if something is put to an initiative or whatever it may be, those are specific issues now that the city council isn't the final authority on whatever that issue is. It's whatever the will of the people is. And so my responsibility would be to uphold whatever the outcome of that vote is, even if everyone here on that dais doesn't like the outcome of that vote.
So, for instance, if the recreation bond that passed 65-35 had gone the other way, and we as the council said, well, that's not the result we expected, and we really want this recreation money, so we're going to do it anyway, that would be an instance where you would very much discourage us from doing something like that.
That may be a bad example because to some extent the council has some authority to bond or things along those lines. So if I can put it in a cleaner example,
Please.
Tonight's text amendment, you passed to be able to change what the parking regulations are for those types of specific facilities. That is referable. So if enough people go out and get enough signatures and say we disagree with the city council, this is the dumbest thing ever, and we want it to be on the next election to overturn this law, and they successfully do so, even though there was a unanimous vote in favor of that law tonight, that would be one of those things where ultimately the will of the people, which is given to them under statute, overruled you, and that was their right to do so, and that is what the will of my client is.
Okay, so you're talking citizen initiatives.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Any other questions? Okay. So, I know everyone has had so much fun tonight, and so I'll look forward to coming back and giving you the next best meeting ever next year.
Thank you, Garrett. We do not have a closed session